The MacVenture series is a collection of games from ICOM Simulations released in the late 80s, first on computer and then eventually ported over to the NES. If you spent any time on my channel at all, you know these games and similar titles from the genre have always held a special place in my heart, having played through them all as a kid. From cutting my teeth on simple text adventures such as Colossal Cave Adventure and Moon Mist, and then eventually moving on to Sierra text adventure games such as Space Quest or the Quest for Glory games, the MacVenture series lives somewhere in the middle of all these titles, in my brain at least. The NES versions were just a really nice marriage of open-world mechanics and point-and-click puzzle solving that felt genuinely special amidst a sea of mostly linear 8-bit platformers and beat-em-ups. With Shadowgate, Deja Vu, and Uninvited, you could freely roam around in these worlds the developers created, whether it was the streets of Chicago in a 40s gritty film noir detective setting, sneaking through a haunted house trying to find your missing sister in Uninvited, or embarking on a classic heroic quest of good and evil through the medieval setting of Castle Shadowgate. These games gave you something unique to chew on, and if you couldn't afford a computer that actually played games in that time period, the MacVenture series was the best taste of an advanced computer gaming experience you were going to get on a home console. Hi, I'm Aaron, and welcome to Friday Night Arcade. This week we're taking a look at something really special, as the long-awaited sequel to the NES version of Shadowgate is finally coming out. I announced the Kickstarter for this over a year ago, and it was due out late last year. And yep, it didn't come out on time, as everyone kept reminding me in the comments in that video. Honestly, I don't care why it was delayed. I don't have any inside information about that. I'm really just glad it's finally here now. If I had to guess, it's probably like what happens with a lot of these Kickstarter game situations where everyone goes into it with the best intentions, but it's still something they're doing on the side along with their regular jobs and family life and everything else. And sometimes things just take longer than expected. And I'd rather they take their time and get it right than rush something out and everyone just ends up disappointed. So, okay, with that out of the way, guys, it's here. It's finally here. I've been waiting on a sequel to Shadowgate since 1989. And it's finally by God here, so let's check it out. Beyond Shadowgate is being released this week under the banner of Zoijoi Games on Steam. The story picks up 35 years after the events of the first Shadowgate. After Jar shot the evil warlock in the face with the staff and put all things right, the land of Kal Torlin enjoyed a nice long reign of sustained peacetime. Most folks forgot about what happened at old Castle Shadowgate and everything was just peachy. That is, until, well, evil started stirring again like it always has a tendency to do. And that's where you come in. You pick up the mantle as a lowly Finling, a career thief named Del Thornborough. You've just been arrested for theft, again, and are awaiting your fate in a dungeon somewhere in the town of Gwynenthal. It's up to you to escape from this dungeon and embark on a heroic quest to stop the evil that's once again rising up. Well, if you've played the original Shadowgate, then you should immediately recognize this screen and know what to do with it as far as the gameplay goes. One of my favorite things about Beyond Shadowgate is that it doesn't try to reinvent the wheel like some of the other entries did. It's just point and click with a series of commands and a first-person view of what your character is seeing in front of you. All the commands are basically the same: use, take, hit, speak, and so forth, although they did swap out one command, and I'll get to that in a bit. The crux of these games is going around from room to room, exploring the area, examining and taking the items, looking for clues, maybe using items on other items or things in your surroundings, and ultimately trying to find a way to make it to the next area and see the next part of the story. Although Beyond Shadowgate is far too big to fit on an actual NES cartridge, they went out of their way to still give it that 8-bit look and make it feel like a seamless transition from the original game until now. Along the way, you encounter all sorts of enemies, monsters, traps, and whatever else the programmers decided to throw at you, and you'll die a lot. This can be frustrating for some people, but to me, it was always more of a feature. Quite frankly, half the fun was seeing what kind of clever traps they threw in there. I always loved the way the monsters looked in 8-bit chunky pixel art, too. This is just awesome. I mean, look at these things. Blah. Blah. Ah. What? And the descriptions of your death were always pretty funny. Sometimes they were really graphic. I always remember being surprised at the gruesome detail they snuck into the NES ports, and that same nightmarish tone carries over to the sequel as well. You lift the edge of the sheet to pick up the object and scream in fright as you see a skull staring back at you. In a flash, the skeleton pulls itself from under the bed and over to you, grabbing your legs and climbing up your body. It sinks its bony fingers deep into your eyes, blinding you before it strangles the life out of you. It's a sad thing that your adventures have ended here. Damn. You'll be doing a lot of reading anytime you're playing a MacVenture title, so it's important for this to actually, be fun to read. And sometimes they're just plain silly. What kind of maniac keeps a tentacle monster in their mansion? Shadowgate doesn't take it easy on you, and you will die a lot, but to me, that was just half the fun. You try something, you die, you reload your save, and you try again. The game has a pretty liberal continue feature, and you can save anywhere, so it's totally fine to just try random things even if you know it's probably not going to work, and you never know, sometimes it will. I will say that, especially with Shadowgate, there was almost always a clue somewhere in the game that gives you an idea of what you should be doing. In Uninvited, a few of the puzzle solutions were borderline ridiculous to figure out, but they got better as the series progressed, and in Shadowgate, it never felt like the game was being unfair. There was always a way to figure out the solution if you paid enough attention to your surroundings and read everything carefully. If you see any books in this game, pick them up and read through them, and maybe even take a few notes. You might find a clue, or if nothing else, you'll pick up on some of the lore and backstory of the game. The only time the game is flat out unfair is more of an issue with limitations of the graphics. Sometimes you're expected to pick out some random little pixel in your view window and know that that's something you need to look at further. This happened in the original Shadowgate. I'll never forget, there was this room with this tiny little knot in the floor. You're supposed to use it to raise it up and reveal a hidden item that you need to proceed with your quest, and I remember it took me forever to figure this out. There is at least one and maybe a few more situations like that in Beyond Shadowgate. To me, that's not a deal breaker, it is what it is, and there's always this little wisp character that follows you around and you can talk to her for clues too. If you get really stuck, they've got a super detailed strategy guide that you can check out. And Sky Point for the art department that put this guide together. I love the throwback to Nintendo Power, and this is cool to read through even if you've already beat the game. Okay, getting back to the deaths in the game, they did do something different with this to where you can occasionally trigger a timed death event. So for example, a monster will appear and then you've got a limited amount of turns to figure out the solution before the monster straight up kills you. You'll know this is happening because the music will change and then the border around your view screen will start flashing red. In the original demo version of this game, they took this a step further and you actually had to execute the solution within a couple of seconds before you would die. Like actual seconds, like you only had a couple seconds to figure out what would happen. So literally the monster pops out and now you've got to process what's going on, execute a command and get yourself out of the situation, and if you don't do that, you're dead. Whereas now the time is broken down into turns, so moving out of the room, that counts as a turn, closing a door, whatever. And if that gets too tedious, you do have the option to disable that in the settings, so you've got an infinite amount of turns to solve it if you want. They seem to have completely removed the version that bases the death timer on actual seconds on a clock. To be honest, I wouldn't have minded if they at least left that in for a different experience, especially with some of the jump scares later in the game, but I'm also glad they made it optional in case differently abled players want to be able to comfortably play the game as well. I do like how the music changes during these sequences though. It's kind of a throwback to the first game when your torch would start running low and you needed to light another torch or find one quickly, or else it's lights out and you're dead. So, I had a conspiracy theory about the first game that although it gives you unlimited continues, every time you die and you use a continue, your torch would go low whenever you moved into the next room or two. This would happen even if you just lit the torch right before you died and continued. So if you kept dying and kept using continues, eventually you'd just not have enough torches left to actually get through the game. Try it out for yourself and see if you have the original cartridge. I swear this was a thing. I actually asked Dave Marsh about this, if this was something intentional that they baked into the game back in the day, and unfortunately he said he couldn't remember if they did that on purpose or not. I used to have OCD about this though, and instead of continuing when I died, I'd reset the game and load from my last save, and thus I would save in every damn room anytime I accomplished literally anything. Anyway, that's not an issue with continues here, and you can die and continue as many times as you want, and it's fine. One other thing that's significantly different from the first game, and probably an improvement, is they swapped out the leave command. In the other MacVenture games, there was a command that let you leave an item in certain locations, and this was a chance to drop anything that you didn't need. So for example, in the old Shadowgate, there was this fountain in the courtyard that you could just drop items in. Because if you were like me, you picked up everything that wasn't tied down, since you never know what you might need. Yes, I am a closet video game item hoarder. But then there was kind of a way to game the system, because if you didn't need need the item, the game would allow you to drop it in one of these specific locations, and then it was just gone forever. If you did actually need the item, then the game would be like, no, wait, stop. So this gave you a chance to unload the unnecessary clutter and was especially useful in Uninvited since most of the items you pick up in that game have no use at all. They're just junk, red herrings to throw you off. So without that, you'd basically just have to brute force your way through trying every single item until something worked on whatever puzzle that you're stuck on. With Beyond Shadowgate, it feels like even though there are way more items in the game, they all actually seem important and actually do something. Also, the game just sort of drops items for you when you're done with them, so you don't have to waste as much time on inventory management, which is helpful and just keeps things moving. Also, just being able to play this game on a computer is a quality of life improvement because the cursor system is really meant to be used with a mouse. Trying to play the old Shadowgate on the NES with a controller is awkward, and although as a kid it never bothered me because I just didn't know any better, I'll admit it is somewhat annoying to go back to now as an adult. Another helpful quality of life perk they added is an auto map feature. First of all, you can actually find pieces of a helpful overworld map throughout the game, but they've also got an auto mapping feature for each area that you're exploring. You can press the spacebar to bring up the auto map, and it just gives you a nice little outline of where all you've been in this area. Back in the day, you had been doing all of that with a pencil and paper, so this is just handy to have. So, okay, at the end of the day, all that matters is this game fun? Is it worthy? Is it worthy of the name Shadowgate? I can say with 100% confidence that yes, this game is absolutely fun, but I'll caveat that with, if you're a fan of the original MacVenture Games. It's awesome. Wandering around in this world again, seeing all these chunky 8-bit monsters, solving puzzles, there's lots of callbacks to the original games. Not just references to the original story or some of the monsters or items that you might find from the first game, but also the story totally takes you on a random jaunt through the other two MacVenture games with Deja Vu and Uninvited. Yes, it's a bit far-fetched how you end up there, but it was just surreal standing in front of the original mansion from Uninvited again. This isn't really a spoiler since this was all laid out in their Kickstarter goals, but yeah, that's just fantastic. Now, I caveated all that with if you're a fan of the original games, because if you've never played any of these games before, I have some reasonable expectations with this. When I sit here and say it's an open-world adventure type of game, I mean, yeah, you're able to explore the world at your own pace and move around, but look, this ain't Skyrim or Breath of the Wild. It's not big by modern game standards at all. And that's totally okay with me. It's big by MacVenture standards. Check this out. The original Shadowgate technically had 43 rooms to explore, while Beyond Shadowgate has 250 rooms in total, along with almost twice the number of items and 4 times the monsters and lots of other actual characters that you can talk to. This is a much longer game with multiple endings too. It was nice to just walk around in a random town in the world of Shadowgate. I remember playing the first game, and when you're standing at the front door of the castle, you can look behind you and the game basically tells you, no, you can't go that way back into the forest. The only way to go is into the castle. I always wanted to just see what the rest of the land looked like, and this game finally scratches that itch. Also, the music is fantastic. A big part of what made these games so special on the NES was that they all had great music. Grahfmetal Games in general just had a really specific and unique type of music that wasn't like anything else on the NES, even the not MacVenture games. Anyway, the music in this new game absolutely shines and captures the mood of the originals while also being something new and different on its own. I felt like the music was as perfect as you could want, short of just dusting off the original themes. I also like the way the music works in this game. It kind of keeps playing in the background over certain areas, so you're not just constantly restarting the theme every time you enter a new room. Go back and play the original. Every time you enter a room, the music just starts playing over again. But anyway, yeah, it all just works, and everything combined together makes it feel like I'm a little kid again playing Shadowgate. I don't want to say too much else about the story at the risk of spoiling anything, but if you loved the original game, you'll absolutely love this new one right up through its nostalgia-filled final act. This is awesome. Look, the reality is there was a time when I never even thought we'd get another proper Shadowgate game at all. Man, I still remember, when you get to the end of the original Shadowgate from 1989, at the very end, you're greeted by the king with all this fanfare, and then there's just this cryptic message saying, "The first story's end." I remember sitting there like a Gomer waiting on something to happen, like a teaser for the next quest or something. I mean, at the very least, this should lead to more Shadowgate games, right? We ended up getting Deja Vu and eventually Uninvited, actually released in reverse order on the NES from when they were developed for Mac, and those were still fun, but I always wanted to revisit the world of Shadowgate one more time. There was technically a sequel on Nintendo 64 called Trials of the Four Towers. I rented this once, and full disclosure, I just remember I never got past the first or second room. It didn't come with a manual, and I couldn't figure out the controls. Someday, maybe I'll go back and check this one out a lot more closely, but at the time, I just remember it feeling like a clunky first-person game and not a really cool, awe-inspiring point-and-click adventure game like the original Shadowgate. Then there was Beyond Shadowgate for TurboGrafx-16, which I didn't even know existed until a few years ago. This game is interesting, but the interface has changed around completely, and then come to find out this wasn't even really developed by the original people that worked on the old Shadowgate. Dave Marsh from ICOM Simulations had nothing to do with this game, even though they did end up using at least a few bits from Dave's original script as the game opens with your character having to escape from a prison. But now, here in 2024, we're finally getting the real sequel that they wanted to make all along, using Dave Marsh original scripts and storyboards that he began working on decades ago, along with the help of indie developer Grahfmetal Games. Yeah, so Grahfmetal Games is the perfect co-developer to work on this, since they made a couple of stellar fan games in the vein of MacVenture. There was Infested, which was this retro sci-fi adventure game, kind of like Dead Space meets Shadowgate, and then there's Spectacle, which kind of has a Quest for Glory vibe to it, and it's set in a magical desert kingdom. If you love MacVenture, these titles are absolutely worth checking out, and I'll put links down in the description below. Okay, so getting all of that out of the way, for all intents and purposes, this is the one true sequel to Shadowgate that I've always wanted to see since sitting there like a little goober, staring at the end screen of the first game while the radiation from my old Zenith slowly fried my brain all those years ago. All I've ever wanted was another Shadowgate game that looked, felt, and played like the original NES game, and now finally here in 2024, we got it! This was probably the last time we'll ever get something like this, so for fans of the originals, I just encourage you to pick this one up and savor it all the way to the end. It's perfect. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on Friday Night Arcade.